This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 28th of June 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Studio 5 in Paris. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, best city, best airport, most extreme holiday destinations, plus politics, philosophy, peace and prose, with my three stellar guests, Professor A.C. Grayling, Michael Keating and Peter Godwin. So stay with us on Monocle on Saturday. That's all coming up. Now, here's the news. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo signed a US-brokered peace agreement on Friday, raising hopes for an end to fighting that's killed thousands and displaced hundreds of thousands more this year. The agreement marks a breakthrough in talks held by the administration and aims to attract billions of dollars of Western investment to a region rich in tantalum, gold, cobalt, copper, lithium and other minerals. The US Supreme Court closed its 2025 term by handing President Donald Trump a series of conservative victories, most notably curbing the power of federal judges to issue nationwide injunctions, especially prominent in the birthright citizenship case, while upholding policies on immigration, transgender service bans, and parental opt-outs from LGBTQ school materials. These decisions reflect a solid 6-3 Conservative majority, asserting executive authority and reshaping legal checks on presidential power. And Donald Trump has abruptly cut off trade talks with Canada over its tax targeting US technology firms, saying it's a blatant attack and that he would set a new tariff rate on Canadian goods within the next week. The move plunges US-Canada relations back into chaos after a period of relative calm that included a cordial G7 meeting in mid-June where Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to wrap up a new economic agreement within 30 days. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin. Now, I've done something slightly naughty, I suppose. Our gorgeous producer, Mariella, who broke her ankle a little while ago, has gone into hospital to have it reset, I believe, some sort of operation. Anyway, she is out of commission. So I grabbed the opportunity and thought, fine, I'm going to take over the show completely this week. Jumped on the Eurostar to Paris and asked my three best boys to join me in the studio. So that's what I've done. And I am joined here by Michael Keating. He's Executive Director at the European Institute of Peace. He's very kindly come in from Brussels to speak to us today. A.C. Grayling, Master of the New College of the Humanities, also obviously a very well-known philosopher who is resident here in Paris. And Peter Godwin, author, memoirist, screenwriter and, yes, sibling. So thank you all very, very much for coming. It's so lovely, not only just to have you in the studio, but to spend the weekend with you. It's just great to be here. I think we need to start with what you've all been up to. So, Anthony, you live a lot of the time in this city. Why is that?
I come here to write, and since I do very little else, I do spend a lot of time here. But that's what I do when I'm here, although, of course, it's impossible not to wander around the boulevards and along the Seine and just enjoy being in Paris. Somebody once wonderfully said, c'est Paris elle-même, it's the city itself, which is the point. You don't have to go to the art galleries every day or to the museums, just being here. And I find that I'm surrounded by the very inspiring ghosts of all the writers and philosophers and painters and other wonderful people, revolutionaries as well, throng the streets of this lovely city.
Absolutely. Michael, you just come in from Brussels.
Yes, well, the big difference between Brussels and Paris, of course, is the Seine. Brussels is one of the few big cities that I know of that doesn't have a significant waterway or lake, but what it's got is forests going right into the middle of the city, which provide a fantastic escape. In terms of what I've been up to, basically trying to make the case for dialogue in today's crazy world, and not just any old dialogue, but dialogue that actually delivers results. And it's a pretty tough sell these days.
And any particular conflict that you're involved in?
Yeah, several, but the one just personally I've been most exposed to recently, and it's one of the few possibly good news stories, is what's happening in Syria. I mean, things could go very, very badly wrong. But actually, it's one of the few places where things could possibly improve.
Well, we're going to circle back to that. Let me first introduce Peter. So, Peter, you have been away from New York, where you live, for about 3 months now. And the last time we met, I think we were together in Auckland and Sydney at literary festivals there. That was back in May. Since then, you've been... I don't know, where have you been?
Can't remember. I mean, I've been, I think, in Australia and mostly in Canada and Montreal and various places doing book festivals on this sort of circuit, trying to flog my book, Exit Wounds, it's called. A story of love, loss, and occasional wars. Available at a good bookstore near you, or not, and I hope it is. So, yes, and it was very funny because, well... and Professor Anthony Grayling was we were sort of part of, I guess it was a group of 8 of us who were on the Australian festival sort of tour, as it were, and they cleverly stagger their festivals so that they can share the immense costs of flying us all over there. And it was, I'm trying to think, Colm Toybean, you, me, Samantha Harvey, who wrote the wonderful book Orbital, Booker Prize winner, Ian Rankin, But it was quite funny because after a while we'd all seen each other at work and we started to ban each other from coming to our sessions because people had heard the jokes before or whatever. So there was that, and then I ended up in Provence and then up here.
And you were admitted in Provence for a party.
It is true. I was in Provence for a party. And also I realised, I mean, what Anthony was saying about Paris, that Provence has a big sort of literary history as well. That the one little village that I was staying with friends there was Bruce Chatwin wrote in Patagonia there. Beckett lived down the hill. Leonard Cohen lived there for a while. You know, there's a kind of long tradition.
And now Philippe Sands lives there.
And now Philippe Sands, exactly.
Yeah. Extraordinary. I mean, what a lovely time we've all had. I would like to go back to Syria now, Michael, because you're saying it's a good news story, but of course there was this awful bombing there in the church very recently.
I mean, there have been a series of terrible things. There was a massacre of Alawites, Druze, and most recently this. I mean, you could argue that it's amazing that it's taken this long for these things to happen. Given the 11 years of hell that the Syrians have been through, you might have thought that some of these reactions would have taken place back in December, when the HTS and Al-Shara swept in. But sanctions have been lifted, and there's the possibility that the economy will come back. The guys running the place are blinking in the daylight because they've never run a government before. All sorts of things could go wrong, but the reduction of Iranian influence and, just getting rid of Assad have created a sense of optimism, that could translate if all these various security issues and meeting this tremendous sense of wanting recognition, wanting justice, wanting to feel that there's a government that cares for you. If that can be met, then things could possibly get better.
I mean, Anthony, I know that you've spoken and written a lot about how, a sort of a philosopher's understanding of war. Can a humanist make sense of war?
Yes and no, which is always the great philosophical answer. I mean, yes, in the sense that human nature and the human condition is such that it's productive of competition. Competition is very productive of conflict. And when conflict happens, because we human beings are still in a very infantile state of our evolution, we end up thinking that violence, throwing things and killing people is the way to solve problems, ultimately, if we can't be intelligent enough to find other ways of doing it. I mean, the very odd thing about humanity is that there are, in parallel, these two huge endeavors. There are people who are striving, struggling, working to try to get people to be rational, to be cooperative, to be peaceful. And then there are other people who are designing and making bombs, and then people who drop them. But I often say to, for example, to my students, I say, consider, say, an act of violence on a city street. One person shoots another, and these two people are involved in this horrible incident. And then come the ambulance crew and the medical staff in the emergency room and the police and the courts and the whole of society. Dozens of people get involved in trying to undo or to mitigate or to push back on the kind of harm. And that, to me, is a very, very hopeful thing. So it seems to me that if you look back across the landscape of history, you see how very often conflicts end up not because of a victory by one side over the other, but out of weariness, out of exhaustion, out of the attrition that has happened. And it's only then that the people engaged begin to try to think more rationally and coolly about how better to adjust their differences. One's got to hope, and I end on this point, that we will grow up eventually and realize that all the sources of conflict, all the things that divide us and over which we disagree and which end up with us throwing things at one another, if we could solve problems about them long before we get to the point of enacting violence on one another to solve it, we really would be doing ourselves a big favour. And I hope that eventually we'll get there.
I mean, Peter, because you've seen this from ground level, you've been a war correspondent. Indeed, you were conscripted as an almost boy soldier yourself in the Rhodesia-Zimbabwe war.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a front row seat for far too long, and it does make, I've got completely jaded in the end. And this last book I wrote is partly about trying to process that and to look at what I learned in the course of covering conflict, especially in Africa. And I think that, and at the end of this, my personal trajectory was at the end of it, I'm very glad to hear what Anthony's saying. I got quite jaded and downhearted because I think I'd just seen too much. And when you follow conflict around, you start to see everything in terms of that. And the old days, I'm now that I don't do daily journalism after having done it for 20 years, I was very conscious of the kind of they used to say in that old tabloid way, if it bleeds, it leads, that there's something about the way that the media, and people say the media is biased, and it is biased. But mostly it's biased, in my experience, it's biased in favor of drama. What they want is a story all the time. And in general, in the way that we slow down to look at car crashes on the road or something, humans are there's this sort of fascination with violence and with conflict and whatever, which the media plays into. And what is astonishing sometimes, you go to places that are, quote unquote war zones, but all around there are people trying to live normally. There are huge areas of peace all the time that aren't reported on that much. And I started to feel sort of, guilty, and I had a very conflicted view of it all myself and my role in it as well. So, But I do think, if you look at a lot of the metrics today, even though there are all these wars and things, the trend overall is hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. But, or at least that's what we hope it is.
Well, a bit fascinating what you're saying. I mean, there is an effort to do peace journalism and peace photography, and it doesn't actually get very far because people are interested in war photography and war journalism. It's very difficult to communicate that. I mean, I think you're right that since the Second World War, the number of conflicts and deaths has gone down, but it's now spiking. It's going up pretty sharply over the last 2-3 years. And in fact, I think only this week, the Institute of Economics and Peace, which is a wonderful outfit that does try and do the metrics on peacefulness, has said that we are now experiencing conditions that have not been seen since the 1930s in terms of the risk of global conflagration, because there are so many conflicts going on and they're so linked that the possibility that one of them will set off a bushfire that then affects everything else. I have to say, in my role, the issue is more conflict resolution and what's happening to the world of conflict resolution. And you mention people being interested in violence, conflict resolution is also becoming theatrical. Trump is making it theatrical. And all the rules about conflict resolution, that it should be long-term and discreet and relationship-based and trust-based, are being thrown out of the window. It's becoming a sort of political marketplace, and the person who can get the most attention, gets the headlines. And we're all holding our breath. Maybe DRC, Rwanda will work. Maybe Israel, Iran, standoff, ceasefire will work. But frankly, while we suspend our skepticism, I have to say all the rules that we've learnt over the last 50 years as to what make conflict resolution effective seem to be being eroded, if not actually thrown out of the window. And that's quite scary.
Anthony, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, what's so interesting is the way that international relations have become a form of theatre, just the way that Michael puts it. It becomes a matter of the deal, and of who's got the bigger fist and who can extract most from the other party. And this feeds off the thing that Peter was talking about the fact that the news media go after conflict because people are interested in conflict, and they're interested in conflict for complex psychological reasons, but fundamentally because witnessing it from the safety of your armchair or television set is, it's cathartic, it's entertaining, it has that comfortable kind of shocking that you forget about 5 minutes later when you go make a cup of tea. Now, again, another thing I say to my students is I say, consider the fact that you see the media full of reports of conflict, war, murder, disaster. And yet, these occurrences are in fact the minority experience of the vast majority of people on the planet. The reason why you don't see on the front cover of the New York Times a headline that says shopkeeper is polite to customer is because this happens just too often. It's not news. And yet the great majority of interpersonal transactions in our world are like that. But we, like dogs and squirrels, we turn to the conflict because we want to find out about it. And now people like the execrable Trump have kind of capitalized on this and turned this into the theater of a lot of things, trade deals, but also, the conflict situation. I mean, if you look at the US bombing of Iran, for example, the idea there was you drop some big bombs on Iran, give them a terrible shock, and then hope that will bring them to the negotiating table. So Trump declared war and then 24 hours later declared peace or truce or whatever it was. And this was a kind of naked example of this blatant kind of costermongering street, market form of diplomacy, which of course is hopeless. I mean, it's not going to work. It's got no legs. It's got no possibility of it enduring and really taking, because it doesn't get into the weeds of the problems. It doesn't get down to the nuances that need to be discussed. And that's why I think Michael is onto something there where he talks about the fact that there's been this pretty serious uptick just over the last 2 or 3 years of conflagrations burning up in so many different parts of the world that the great danger is they would join up and there would be one total conflagration. I mean, I think it is shocking to hear Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, saying we have to prepare for war. What? I mean, this just seems kind of unthinkable that somebody, allegedly as commonsensical, if that's what he is, as Starmer, is saying such a thing.
Absolutely, Michael.
Well, I was going to say that you led off, Georgina, with DRC, Rwanda. And the media is full of stuff about half to 30 years of conflict, maybe. I mean, it took something like 25 years to do Northern Ireland. It took 25 years plus to do Colombia, and they're not even over yet. So the idea that you can sort of cut a deal and somehow all the kind of underlying dynamics are going to be resolved is actually nonsensical. It's good to have these ceasefires, but unless they're part of political processes, unless they're part of processes which result in people feeling a difference to their lives, then they're unlikely to work. I just want to bring us back to Paris. There's quite an interesting exhibition, photographic exhibition on Marie-Louise de Decker, who's a photographer who went to many war zones, and she tried to photograph human dignity in war zones. So I commend it to you. It's a couple of 100 yards away.
Well, in fact, let's talk about art in Paris, because the Pompidou Centre is about to close and people are really up in arms here about it. They're very, very cross. It's closing for 5 years for renovations. And in there at the moment is the Paris Noir exhibition and also Wolfgang Tillmans. I wonder if you've seen either, Anthony.
But I'm going to hurry to do it, given that it is going to close. Yeah, there have been lots of different kinds of problems about, as it were, provision of art in Paris. The Louvre got itself into a problem, being inundated with tourists. So we've seen in Italy, the overwhelming of the galleries there and of coping with tourists, and the irresponsibility of some of them taking selfies and falling through canvases and doing damage and sitting on chairs and what have you. I mean, the thing has got out of hand, and you might sympathize almost with curators and gallery directors saying, we're just going to shut this place up and send everybody somewhere else.
I mean, the Pompidou Centre is really not that old. It's not even 50 years old, and I think locals, particularly people around the venue itself, are very, very cross about this. Is it? I mean, I wonder if it. There's a big piece about it in Le Monde today. Saying why. I mean, designed obviously, as we know, by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, and basically it's closing in order to reduce its energy consumption by 40%, because of course when it was built back then, that wasn't front and centre of what people were thinking about. Another exhibition, in fact, one of the ones that we're specifically here to see is at the Fondation Louis Vuitton. We're going to go and see the Hockney retrospective, which I think will be tremendous. I've been told it's a tremendous, tremendous exhibition. Now, I have promised that we will speak about airports because in the Washington Post this week there was a list of the 50 best airports in the United States. And it was just interesting sort of what they chose and why. And all of you have been to many, many airports. Peter, most recently, you and I think, have transited through about 15 of them together. So if you had to choose your favourite airport, Anthony.
Well, do you know what? I'm staggered at the thought that an airport should figure on anybody's list of anything to do with favourites. But my favourites are a kind of airport, that's to say a very small one, where you don't have vast crowds and long queues and immense amounts of security. I like the little airport at Ballina, which is near Byron Bay in Australia, because you turn up, you throw your bag onto the conveyor, get into the aeroplane, off you go, and it's just so easy. The drawback, of course, is it tends not to have a cafe and other facilities that you might need. But just the ease of transit is the important thing. But you forced me to think, well, what are my favourite airports? And the answer has to be any airport next to any city that I want to visit.
Peter.
Well, I have to say, just because of the improvement, LaGuardia went from being, a place where you just all hope, human hope died. It was awful, awful, awful. And they had this big plan to renovate it while keeping it open, which was, it doesn't have a very big footprint to start with. And they had a stroke of luck, which is just as they were about to start, COVID happened. And it's one of the few big public projects that I know of recently that was finished ahead of time because COVID, they were able to just do it. And it is literally, to call it a refurbishment is not true. It is a completely different airport, and it's extraordinary what good design can do. I do, however, think that, to echo Anthony, airports in general, there's something that happens. If you look at human faces in airports, they've got this sort of, they look depressed. And I think it's something to do with, you lose all agency when you go into an airport. You basically are just being moved around. And I think, so I think it's a real design challenge to try and make an airport where that doesn't happen. And part of the problem, I also think, is that, many airports, I was struck when I was coming through, I guess it was it Gatwick recently, where as you come through immigration, you are just, the only way round is through duty free, this big snaking through all, and it's extraordinary. It's just that you want to say airports have a job, and it's to get you onto planes, not to buy perfume.
Changi's good, though, in Singapore, isn't it?
Well, that's an extraordinary place. And also, the big new airports in the Gulf states, some sort of, Dubai and those places are extraordinary. To some extent, they're temples of consumption as well as getting you on planes.
Michael.
Well, I agree that airports are sort of the ultimate gated communities, aren't they? Because, everybody's gone through security, and then you're in this sort of, a commercial wonderland. And I find myself suppressing my irritation at being manipulated in this way, but put up with it because you want to get around. I'm a bit like you, Anthony. I like old-fashioned and small airports, but I think they're few and far between. Having said that, airports have their own little ecosystem. I mean, there's a nice barber in Rome Airport who's been there for years and years and years, and probably will be there for years and years and years. And you can discover airports where there are people who literally are kind of part of an airport community. And if you're lucky enough to go to the same place often enough, you discover this.
One of the shoeshine guy, I think, in one of the JFK terminals, and I watch him when I go there, and he sits there watching all the sneakers go past. And fewer and fewer people need their shoes. And I look at him thinking, this is not a growth market, mate. You're going to have to find a new line of work.
I really, really love Auckland Airport. It's got spectacular views. It's beautifully laid out. And one of the things that I really liked about it was the women's bathrooms, because what happens often is you just have the basins and you've got the taps and the mirror and everything. There's nowhere to put your bag. So if you're there and in an airport you are wanting to put your bag down so you can brush your teeth, so you can do your makeup, whatever it is, they have a completely separate area with just a counter and a mirror. And it's just, I don't know why more places don't do that. But the best thing was when you and I were there last, Peter, our flight was delayed and we were absolutely happy about it because there were 2 massage chairs by the gate.
With astonishing view as well of the mountains.
Yeah, so you just lay back, and we were just like, yes, it's delayed more. Let's have another 15 minutes. It was just gorgeous.
I used to love the old Harare airport before it was modernized, and it was just sort of one big building. And the joke was that when you arrived there was a big sign which said, "Welcome to Harare Airport. Please turn your watches back to 1963."
Now, of course, one of the things that we all have in common is Southern Africa. We're all in some way or another connected to that. And I want to talk about Kenya now because very, very exciting weekend in Kenya this weekend. It's the 4th edition of the NBO Lit Fest, which is co-presented by Book Bunk and Hay Festival Global. So it brings together writers and artists and thinkers to explore alternative knowledge systems. It started on the 26th, it runs until the 29th, and it's taking place in Nairobi's public libraries. That's Macmillan Memorial Library, Kaloleni Library and Eastlands Library. And one of the reasons that they do that is that Book Bunk's sole purpose, I suppose, or one of their purposes, is to just expand and improve libraries. You know more about that, Michael.
A little bit. I mean, I just love the idea that there's an effort to kind of reinvigorate the libraries. I mean, there is this infrastructure. It's gently sort of, rotting, actually. And so this is an effort to turn it around, to refresh the book collections, by the way, which tend to be quite Eurocentric, to bring in more African and Kenyan writers and poets and so on, and to make them places to which young people all over the country can go. So the idea of converting what is otherwise a sort of dwindling asset, I suppose, and turning into something that's socially productive and brings people together, I think it's a fantastic idea.
And if one can't physically be in Nairobi, of course, you can watch it online. If you just go to the Hay Festival site, it will take you directly there. And if I could just recommend one session, which is happening tomorrow, 3:45 p.m. local, that's Kenyan time. It's Leila Slimani, who is, of course, the French-Moroccan author, she's probably best known for Lullaby. She's also she's a French diplomat in her capacity as the personal representative of Emmanuel Macron. And she won the Prix Goncourt, the biggest French literary prize. An amazing, amazing woman. I wonder if you've come across her much at all, Anthony.
I haven't. I'd love to. I'd also love to be at the Nairobi Literary Festival too, for many of the reasons that Michael has mentioned. It is so important that the old-fashioned traditional library should continue to exist at least somewhere in some places. Every country should have one, because there are big differences, there really are, between browsing a shelf and having the serendipity of meeting something, of taking down a dusty volume. I mean, everybody talks about the smell and the feel, and you know what, that those things do matter a little bit. But just that kind of experience of being among books and being in a place where people read, where the whole atmosphere is dedicated to that. It's very different from scrolling through on Amazon, where they try to reproduce something like that browsing sensation by giving you a whole, pictures of front covers. But the very idea of a library, of a place where books are gathered together and where readers are invited, or people are invited to come with the possibility of meeting with something completely new, something expansive. Doors. Every book is a door that opens into a whole world. And so there should be such places. It's wonderful to me that they're doing this.
Of course, you were at a previous iteration of the Nairobi Book Festival. I think this was back in, it was 2013, wasn't it? September 2013, where there was a bombing.
Right. It was the Story Moja Hay Festival, and I was there as one of the writers when the Westgate Mall was attacked by young Al-Shabaab insurgents, and we actually lost one of the poets who was attending the festival, Kofi Awuna, who was a great Ghanaian poet and had been a diplomat. I think he'd been, if I'm right, Michael, he'd been Ghana's ambassador to the UN, I think, and was now retired, and he was one of the one of the victims, and I do recall. I mean, it's rather a sort of somber thought. I mean, we were checking morgues because there were a number of writers still missing after several hours, and we were trying to figure out where everybody was, and I came across something that I hadn't hitherto come across, which is why the workers in the morgue wear red Wellington boots.
Oh, yes. Michael, of course, we've seen violence again in Kenya this week because it's a year since protesters stormed Parliament, and they were gathered again this week, and police using live ammunition. We think at least 16 protesters killed on the streets. These were countrywide. But this is a kind of different kind of conflict, isn't it? That there's no outside force here. This is within the country.
Absolutely, and Peter's mentioned a distinguished Ghanaian. Another one, Kofi Annan, played an extraordinary role back in when was it? 2008, trying to encourage what Anthony was talking about, is ensuring that differences among Kenyans, and there are many, both because of the colonial legacy, but also because of land and all the sectarian issues, that the politics were managed in a way that prevented it from slipping into violence. And actually, these things are scary that you're talking about, but so far the history of Kenya is of managing to keep the lid on things on the whole, and to be an example of how you can use politics to resolve differences, but it's always very scary. I think a lot of the protests now are to do with the condition that people are living in, and that's a whole other story. I mean, we have, biodiversity loss and climate change. We're seeing it here too, by the way. I mean, but you're also seeing growing inequality, you're seeing kind of polarization through the media, so you're dealing with all sorts of issues that then create tensions that cut across sectarian lines and are essentially about people feeling that their futures are not being attended to, and they're not being listened to, and they're not being given an opportunity to fulfill their hopes and aspirations.
This doesn't appear to be knocking tourism in Kenya, particularly on the beaches. And I'd like now to pivot to this story coming out of North Korea, which is that Kim Jong-un has hailed a new North Korean beach resort as one of the country's greatest feats this year. So it's a huge thing. It's a big tourism drive that's going to one day include foreign visitors. And I just wonder what it would take for you to go on holiday in North Korea, Anthony. I mean, I have to say I'd love to, but...
Well, I wonder too, actually, because on the one hand, I don't want to subsidize the regime by spending any of my tourist dollars in that country. But I must say I would be absolutely fascinated to go and have a little look around, even though I know, of course, that I would be, corralled in amongst the cardboard frontages of a Potemkin village while I'm there. But at least you might be able to see something through the cracks. I don't know.
Well, both
In fact, I mean, I have had beach holidays in dictatorships before. I lived in China for a while back in the 80s and used to go to the Bohai Gulf, for beach holidays there. And what was fascinating about that was that the great concentration on development and economic improvement and so on by the party ignored all those areas which didn't have much prospect of really getting any better, and therefore they were kind of, in amber, in aspic, that they were little bits of pre-1949 China, Western colonization of the Chinese seaboard, and there was a shop there which was still with its German name, probably even run by its Germans, who produced the most delicious ice cream that you wouldn't find now. I mean, completely different in taste and texture, a kind of ice cream from the old world. Medieval.
They've got great trams.
You find these sorts of things if you go to dictatorships.
You must have been to a fair few, Michael.
I haven't been to North Korea, but I know it's got good trams, by the way. Nice old-fashioned tram. I have to say, I saw the image of the leader watching people on the water slide. Did you see that? And I felt very anxious for the people coming down the water slide with the leader sitting there and 3 people behind him taking notes. Did you see that in the buildings in the background?
It's scary, so it's splash.
There's a wonderful book, decades old now, by an American author called P.J. O'Rourke, called Holidays in Hell, where he basically goes on holiday in different war zones. I did actually go on holiday once to Sri Lanka in the middle of the civil war there, and there were very few tourists for obvious reasons, and we went to, so it was a very cheap holiday, very competitively priced, and we were at some lovely hotel. We arrived, sort of walked to the atrium, looked around, we were the only guests, and there was a string quartet, and it struck up if you were the only boy in the world and I was the only girl.
Well, it brings back a memory of renting a hut on the beach at Trincomalee in just a little moment of peace between 2 outbreaks of violence. And this little hut was full of bullet holes. But I used to smoke a pipe in those days, and sitting on the beach with my pipe, and swarms of little Sri Lankan kids would come up offering weed, marijuana. And I refused it because I've always been very nervous about doing anything that I'm not familiar with, like nicotine and alcohol, but things that might mess up with what passes for my brain. And they were astonished. I had the pipe. I was sitting on the beach. Why the hell didn't I buy their marijuana?
Oh dear, oh dear. Now, just before we end, I have to tell you that Michael came into his own last night as a person that resolves conflicts, because I got stopped on the metro for not having a ticket. Now, the point was I did have a ticket. It's way too complex to go into, but an argument ensued, and I refused to be fined and sort of ended up holding up my wrist saying, "Take me to prison, I will not pay." Michael, thank you for doing that. It was I'm still not quite sure what happened or why that happened, but in the end, anyway,
there was a deal. Actually, yeah. There was a ceasefire, and
which you broke it.
Which I broke.
And can I just say, my brother ran away and wouldn't have anything to do with it. He went and hid at the other end.
There were enough
bloody journalists.
There's only so much mansplaining can happen in one.
Anyway, the upshot of it is that this morning I just would not get on the metro on my own. I've been traumatized, so I got an Uber. Very nice driver, but quite soon there won't be any. So driverless cars obviously is a huge topic around the world at the moment, but particularly in the US. And there's a great piece today about the sort of moral questions surrounding driverless cars. But first of all, Peter, tell us, because you've been in the back of one.
In a driverless, in fact, it's called Waymo in the States. I believe it's part owned by Google. Waymo uses Jaguar SUVs, very smart, and I was just very curious, so I hailed one remotely. Obviously, it comes. I think it reads the signal of your phone. It sort of comes straight to your phone, and it has a big glass dome on the roof with all the gubbins in it, the cameras and the whatnot. But as it approaches you, your initials go round that dome so that you can see that it's sent for you. and then it stops, and you get in. You can get in the front if you want. In the passenger seat in the front. I got in the back, and there's a steering wheel and everything, which sort of turns on its own, and you have a screen in front of you, and off it went, and you can adjust the temperature and the music and this and that and whatever. And I took a little video of it and made the mistake of putting it, on Instagram or something, and it was a very polarizing thing, because my personal reaction was that within 5 or 10 seconds I felt completely safe. It is an amazing driver. It has exactly the right stopping distance. It goes the speed limit. It doesn't dawdle, but it doesn't and it doesn't take calls. It doesn't try and chat to you. It doesn't have body odor issues. It isn't eating things. I found it very relaxing. But obviously, it's going to be, in terms of, I was looking at the statistics the other day, and I think there are, in America alone, it's something like 2 million people employed in Uber, taxis, this kind of thing, who now stand to lose their jobs eventually. And indeed, in these recent protests in America, the No King protests, in LA, one of the things that happened that they hailed Waymos, and when they arrived, they burned them. I believe 5 were burned. So it's controversial from that point of view, but I think it's also controversial in terms of the decision making of the drivers themselves.
Yeah. So Anthony, Tom Whipple, writing in the Times today, has this piece entitled "Morality and the Machine: Why Driverless Cars Must Learn Not to Kill." As more autonomous vehicles take to our streets, he writes, they must answer the ethical question: if you can save a life by taking a life, should you?
Well, yet again, yes and no. Look, the desideratum is that a driverless car should kill nobody and do no damage. And looking forward, I think probably in the future, when all vehicles are driverless and all of them are interacting with one another and being navigated by GPS and so on, it'll probably be absolutely safe. And they were all, 99.9% safe, much safer than the roads are now. But in the current situation, if ever a driverless vehicle is presented with its AI, that is presented with a choice, then obviously it has to be do least harm. The thing about ethical theories is that no one of them ever really addresses all different sorts of problems. And although one might, on the whole, not want to be a utilitarian, that is one that says, try to maximize benefits and minimize disbenefits and so on, there are certain cases where when the choice is binary and it's a hard choice and there's no way out of the choice, then you have to be utilitarian about it. And so the program in question has to be pretty nuanced in a way. At the outset, you drew the contrast between a woman with her baby crossing the street and an elderly individual crossing the street. Which one does the driverless taxi mow down? Well, I would imagine that if these taxis had taught themselves how to make choices on a utilitarian basis, I'm afraid it's the elderly individual who's going to get it.
Michael, thoughts?
Well, 1, I've never been in a driverless car. 2, I'm reassured by what Peter says, but I'm still not there, I'm afraid. And it reminds me of the story of railways. There's a lot of railways that do not need train drivers. But people are so nervous about the idea of being on a train without a driver that they now have people in the front to make it look as if the train is has somebody in charge, even though that person is not required. Because there's a psychological issue, I think. People just want to know that there is somebody personally responsible. And I think this is going to be a problem with everything, by the way, including weapons. Everything is AI driven. Well, who do you hold accountable? And even if it's a complex legal issue and philosophical issue, but it's also just a very basic human issue. You want to know that there's somebody, that you can relate to.
Well, let's turn to the philosopher.
Oh, well, the desire to have a human body sitting in the front of the train, in the kind of case you mentioned, that's a sort of transition thing. As people get more used to the idea that things can be automatic and maybe even more efficient and safer because they are. But the accountability point is a really good one, and this especially applies to autonomous weapons systems. those that make up their own minds, the AI does anyway, about who to kill, what to destroy, what counts as a military asset of the putative enemy. And that question, the question of accountability, has not yet been decided, but it has to be. I mean, there are some vague things you might say about, how accountability goes up the chain of command and ultimately to government. But, it needs to be clearer, and the discussions yet haven't been really worked through, haven't been had, partly because we still don't know just what there is in the way of AI weaponry out there yet, and what's in development. We all live in the future without knowing that we do. The future is already here, and the future is already here when it comes to unmanned weapons and autonomous weapons. And there's a very, very frightening scenario here of teaching weapon systems to make their own decisions about who to kill and what to destroy, and what happens when they go wrong, and where people can avoid being held accountable for it because of, they didn't intend the system to do that, but some malfunction, dust or whatever it might be. So this is a very, very complex situation, and it feeds into, because it's an instance of a more general problem, which is non-human beings, much smarter than human beings, much more fully equipped with information, doing decision-making, and that would hitherto have been done by human beings. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we prefer the sometimes morally flavoured frailties of human reasoning to the relentless logic of a logic system? And if so, why, given the rather poor track record of the former?
You've really given us a lot to think about. Before we go, I'd like to end with a nod to our host city, because Paris, of course, has come out top in Monocle's Quality of Life survey, the 10 most livable cities in the world, and we have chosen Paris. Now, you used to live here, Michael.
Well, I did. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years ago when I was sort of 17, and it's just totally transformed. I mean, and particularly the last couple of years, but I defer to Anthony on this, but, as an occasional visitor, the streets have been cleared of much of the traffic, the trottinette, the scooters have gone, which used to be a sort of, great way to get yourself killed. They've gone. The Seine has opened up. There's an effort to try and make it swimmable. There's much more street life. So I think it's really it's refreshing being here, and the noises have changed and the smells have changed, and it's a much nicer place to be than it. Although I quite like the kind of black and white grubbiness of 50 years ago, but still.
I have to tell you, the first time I came to Paris, I was 13 years old. And I had, back home in Zimbabwe, I had a big horse passion. I had a pony of my own and everything. And I came to Paris with my mother and my older brother, who's here today. And he told me that in France, people only eat horse meat. And we were here for a week. I only ate bread rolls the whole time we were here. And I'm still traumatized by it, Peter. We had to have fish last night. It's your fault. How are you finding Paris?
I mean, I must say, to go back to something Michael said, that I haven't been here, I think, I was working it out last night, I think I haven't been here, weirdly, for about 6 years. And the transformation of what they've done with the traffic is truly extraordinary. I mean, it's just it's suddenly the centre bit feels like it's been almost completely pedestrianised, and it's absolutely radical what's happened. I mean, it feels completely different. And the other thing I've noticed is they've reclaimed the river. The Seine is just, it used to be, after dark and whatever, you wandered down there and it was sort of drug stuff and it was a bit dangerous. And now it was all along the banks. It was young people having picnics, and it was kind of extraordinary.
Lovely walk we had there last night. Anthony, of course, you are the resident, though. Tell us what you think.
Well, Paris has been a very, very regular and frequent port of call for me for more than half a century. I first came here as a student back in the late 60s. And indeed, on that occasion, walked through the little street that I now live in and thought to myself then, this is where I would like to have an apartment, and now I do, which is wonderful. And I've been, spending a great deal of time here, especially over the last 4 or 5 years. But both Michael and Peter are completely right. There have been a lot of changes and improvements in the environmental sense and the traffic sense. I mean, for example, there's a hell of a lot less dog shit on the pavements of Paris than there used to be, because it used to be a lot of good luck, could be encountered on the streets of Paris. So in that sense, and the traffic too, that's certainly the case. But where I am in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, it's as it was, back in the 17th, 18th century. And in that respect, it hasn't changed very much. And one of the reasons why it is such a livable city, by the way, is that if you do live anywhere, like the 6e or the Mairie, or wherever it might be, the Marais, everywhere is walkable. You don't have to take the metro. You don't have to get into trouble, Georgina. You can just walk. And it's wonderful to walk because, everything that meets the eye, every eye line, every corner, every little square, every cafe, all the people there are just such wonderful, grist to the mill of speculation about that. And of course, the cafe life in Paris is wonderful too. Although there is a bit of a question mark rising above it, and that is that I think our Lady Mayor, who is a very energetic person, is thinking about banning smoking on the terrace of the cafes, which I have to say would be, well, probably better for our health.
Yeah, well, Anthony, having said that, I think it's probably time for us to wrap up so you and I can go and have a fag outside. If you'd like to look more at Monocle's Quality of Life survey, it is out now, and of course, magazine available on all good newsstands. So thank you, Paris, for having us here, and get well soon, Mariella. That's all for Monocle on Saturday. Many, many thanks to my guests, Peter Godwin, Michael Keating and Anthony Grayling. Thanks also to Mariella and to Desiree Bandley in Zurich, and our studio engineer back in London, Lily Austin. And Monocle on Saturday will return next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.